The morning sun bathed the pastures of Stone Ridge Farm with a golden light. Emily Grace, standing by the stable fence, observed the horses with an attention few would understand. Since she was a little girl, she knew that her way of connecting with animals was different. It wasn't just the affection or routine care. There was something deeper, a silent communication that transcended words. "Emily Grace, breakfast is on the table." The strong voice of Frank, her father, echoed across the property. With a final glance at Star, the pregnant mare that had worried her for days, Emily walked toward the main house. The farm in Greenfield, with its verdant hills and mild climate, had always been her home. A place where her gift, although misunderstood, had space to exist. In the kitchen, with its worn ceramic floor, Frank was already seated at the table, his expression carrying the marks of decades of work under the sun. Emily served herself coffee and sat in silence. "That mare is going to foal this week," she finally said, "and something isn't right." Frank furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, not right?" "The veterinarian was here last week and said everything is normal." "It's not something the vet would see, Dad. It's like she's apprehensive, afraid. It's not just the natural nervousness of giving birth." The man sighed, his gaze mixing skepticism and a certain weariness. "Emily Grace, I know you have a way with animals, always have, but you can't go inventing problems where none exist. Nature knows what it's doing." The young woman lowered her eyes to her cup. It was always like this. Her father, a practical and traditional man, saw the world through the lens of concrete experience. For him, dealing with animals was a matter of firmness, routine, and proven methods. Emily's special gift, that almost supernatural intuition, was for Frank just exaggerated sensitivity. "I'll keep an eye on her," Emily said, rising. "That's all." She left before her father could protest. On the way to the stable, she crossed paths with Martha, the farm's oldest employee, who had taken care of the house and Emily since her mother left when she was still a child. "It's Star, isn't it?" asked the woman, her observant eyes catching the worry on the young woman's face. Emily nodded, grateful not to have to explain. "Your father still doesn't believe you?" "He'll never believe me, Martha. For him, I'm just a girl who grew up liking animals." The woman smiled gently. "Some gifts aren't for everyone to understand, my dear." In the stable, Emily found Star restless, her large eyes reflecting a discomfort that went beyond the physical. She approached slowly, whispering words of comfort. The animal, recognizing her presence, visibly relaxed. "What's scaring you so?" "Much," murmured Emily, stroking the mare's neck. "It's not just the foal, it's something more, isn't it?" In response, Star lowered her head, gently touching Emily's shoulder with her muzzle. It was in these moments that the young woman felt her gift most vividly, a mutual understanding, an open channel between two different species. Heavy footsteps interrupted the moment. Frank entered the stable, his eyes assessing the situation. "Bite the tear. Veterinarian will be here tomorrow for a final check," he announced, in a tone that left no room for discussion. "Until then, try not to worry so much. These things are natural." Emily knew there was no point in arguing. For her father, her concern was just the nervousness of an inexperienced young woman. But she knew with an inner certainty that something wasn't right with Star, and somehow she would need to find a way to help, even if it meant challenging Frank's convictions. When her father walked away, she turned her attention back to the mare, silently promising that she wouldn't leave her. Alone, that she would be there when the time came. What Emily still didn't know was that the birth would not only be a test for her gift, but the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. Night fell over the farm like a cloak of silence. Emily couldn't sleep. Star's restlessness seemed to echo inside her, calling her like a distant bell. Shortly after midnight, she got up, put a coat over her pajamas, and headed to the stable with a flashlight in hand. The full moon illuminated the path between the house and the animal facilities. The cold air of the early morning in Greenfield made her breath condense into small clouds. Opening the stable door, Emily knew immediately. The moment had arrived. Star was lying in the straw, her breathing accelerated, eyes wide with panic. A low, anguished whinny escaped the mare when she saw Emily. "I'm here," she whispered, kneeling beside the animal. "Everything will be okay." Her hands trembled slightly as she stroked Star's neck. The connection between them intensified in that instant, as if an invisible channel had opened. Emily could feel the mare's fear, but also something more specific. There was a problem with the foal's positioning. Without hesitation, she picked up the phone and called the local veterinarian, Dr. Wilson, an elderly gentleman who had known the family for years. "Sorry for the hour, Doctor, but it's urgent. Star has gone into labor and the foal is malpositioned." "How do you know that, girl?" the sleepy voice of the man questioned. Emily took a deep breath. This wasn't the time to explain her gift. "I just know. Please come." Quickly. While she waited, she stayed with Star, whispering words of comfort, her hands passing gently over the animal's trembling body. There was an intimacy in that moment, a mutual trust that transcended the normal relationship between human and animal. When Dr. Wilson arrived, 40 minutes later, he found Emily exactly as he had imagined, completely involved with the animal, creating an atmosphere of calm amid the tense situation. "Does your father know you're here?" asked the veterinarian, preparing his equipment. "No, and I'd prefer it stays that way for now." The man nodded, understanding the complexity of the relationship between father and daughter. After examining Star, his eyes widened in surprise. "The foal is really malpositioned. How did you know?" Emily just smiled, a sad smile that carried the weight of years of misunderstanding. The following hours were intense. Dr. Wilson worked skillfully, but the birth was difficult, requiring all his experience. Emily remained a constant presence, calming Star when fear threatened to overwhelm the animal. At the most critical moment, when it seemed they would lose both mother and foal, something extraordinary happened. Emily placed her hands on Star's belly and closed her eyes. A serene energy emanated from her, visible even to the skeptical Dr. Wilson. The mare, who seconds before had been writhing in agony, suddenly calmed down, as if understanding she needed to cooperate. With one last joint effort, the foal finally emerged, a brown colt with a small white star on its forehead, exactly like its mother. Dr. Wilson quickly checked its vital signs, confirming with relief that it was healthy, despite the difficult birth. "I've never seen anything like this in 40 years of practice," he said, watching Emily clean the newborn with maternal care. "You have a gift, girl, something that can't be learned from books." The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon when Frank appeared in the stable, alerted by Martha. His face, hardened by life in the country, expressed a mixture of concern and irritation. "Why didn't you wake me up?" he asked, but his voice lost its firmness when he saw the scene. His daughter sitting in the straw, the newborn foal nestled against her, Star watching with calm eyes. "Because I knew what to do," Emily replied simply. Dr. Wilson, putting away. His equipment intervened. "Your daughter saved them both, Frank. The foal was in an impossible position. Without her intervention, we would have lost both." Frank looked at the veterinarian, then at his daughter, an undecided expression on his face. It was difficult for him to admit he was wrong, that Emily's feeling was more than the imagination of a dreamy young woman. "You did well," he finally said, the words coming out with difficulty. "But next time, wake me up." For Emily, that small recognition was enough. While her father and the veterinarian discussed post-birth care, she remained with the foal, feeling a connection that went beyond the physical. That night had proved not just to others, but to herself, that her gift was real and powerful. What she didn't know was that someone else would discover about that night, someone whose entry into her life would change everything she believed. She knew about herself and her special abilities. 3 weeks passed since the birth of the foal, which Emily named Moonlight, in reference to the full moon night when he came into the world. The story of the difficult birth and the young woman's extraordinary intervention had spread through the region, passing from mouth to mouth like all interesting news in small towns. On a particularly hot afternoon, while Emily was brushing Star's coat in the outer paddock, an unfamiliar car entered the property. It was a modern vehicle contrasting with the aging tractors and pickup trucks of the farm. A tall man, about 40 years old, got out of the car. He wore jeans and a short-sleeved shirt, but there was something in his posture that betrayed a visitor from the city. "Good afternoon," he called, approaching the fence. "You must be Emily Grace." She paused the brushing, observing the stranger with curiosity and a hint of mistrust. "That's me. And you are?" "Richard Stone. I'm a veterinarian specialized in animal behavior." He extended his hand over the fence. "I've heard a lot about you and Stars Foaling." Emily shook the offered hand, noticing the calluses that contradicted the first impression of an office man. "You came to see Moonlight?" she asked, a proud smile lighting up her face at the mention of the foal. "Also," replied Richard, smiling back, "but I'm more interested in you, to be honest." Before Emily could respond, the noise of a tractor announced Frank's arrival. Seeing the visitor, he turned off the engine and approached with a questioning expression. "Richard Stone," the man introduced himself again. "I was telling your daughter that I heard about the incident with the mare." "Dr. Wilson has a loose tongue," commented Frank, without hostility, but with a typical reserve of his personality. "Did you come just out of curiosity, or do you have some purpose?" "A bit of both," admitted Richard. "I work with the rehabilitation of problematic animals that have suffered traumas, that have developed aggressive or phobic behaviors, and when I heard about Emily's ability, I was intrigued." Frank crossed his arms, his face hardening. "My daughter is not a circus attraction, Doctor." "Dad!" protested Emily, embarrassed. Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Far from me to suggest that. What Emily did with that mare demonstrates exceptional sensitivity, a gift that few possess. I'm interested professionally." The tension diminished a bit, and Frank invited the visitor for coffee on the porch of the main house. As they walked, Emily observed Richard with growing curiosity. There was something different about him, a way of looking at the animals from a distance that suggested more than professional interest. On the porch, while Martha served coffee in porcelain cups reserved for visitors, Richard better explained his work. "I have an animal rehabilitation center in Pine Ridge. We work with cases that others consider lost, horses that no one can ride, dogs that have developed severe phobias, even exotic animals rescued from abusive situations." Emily's eyes shone with interest. "And you can rehabilitate them?" "Some, yes," he responded with honesty. "Others take more time. Each animal carries its story, its traumas. The secret is in understanding what's behind the behavior, the root cause." Frank observed the conversation with a neutral expression, but his eyes betrayed a mixture of pride and concern when they rested on his daughter. "What does this have to do with Emily?" he finally asked. Richard took a sip of coffee before responding. "I'd like to invite her to visit the center, perhaps spend a few days there, observe our work, and who knows, help with some cases." The silence that followed was laden with tension. Emily looked at her father, then at Richard, her heart racing with the possibility that was opening up. "I would love to," she said finally. "We need to talk about this," interrupted Frank, his tone making it clear that the decision would not be made at that moment. Richard seemed to understand the family dynamic. He placed the cup on the table and stood up. "Of course, I wasn't expecting an immediate response. I'll leave my card. I'll be in town for 2 more days at the Mountain View Hotel." When the visitor departed, Frank and Emily remained on the porch, the silence between them heavy with unsaid words. "You can't be considering this," Frank finally said. "Why not?" countered Emily. "It's an opportunity to learn more, to better understand this gift. What if he's just an opportunist? City people are different, Emily Grace." She sighed, aware of her father's deep-rooted distrust of strangers, especially those from the big city. "Can we at least visit the center, see it with our own eyes?" Frank looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. "I'll see what I can find out about this Richard Stone first," he finally conceded. "If he's legitimate, we'll consider a visit." Emily smiled, knowing that this was the most she would get for now. In her heart, however, a certainty was beginning to form. That meeting was not the work of chance. There was something more, a greater force guiding events. And for the first time, she felt that her special gift could have a greater purpose than just helping the animals on her father's farm. The dawn was still a promise on the horizon when the farm's telephone rang. Emily, already awake and preparing for her daily chores, answered on the second ring. "Stone Ridge Farm," she said, her voice still slightly hoarse from recent sleep. "Emily? It's Richard. I'm sorry to call so early, but we have a situation." She straightened up instinctively. "What happened?" "We're rescuing a buffalo from a traveling circus that was shut down by inspectors. The animal is in deplorable condition, and we need a place to keep it temporarily, until we can transport it to the center in Pine Ridge." Emily hesitated for only a second. "I'll talk to my father." She found Frank in the kitchen, drinking his morning coffee while reviewing notes on milk production. Upon hearing Richard's request, his face hardened. "A buffalo? Here?" He shook his head. "It's too dangerous, Emily. We don't have the structure. We have the old stone corral, the one we used for the wilder cattle," she argued. "It's sturdy and spacious. It's not just about physical space. Buffaloes are powerful and unpredictable animals, especially if it was mistreated in a circus." Emily sat down across from her father, her eyes pleading. "Please, Dad, it's temporary, and maybe it's my chance to show Richard what I can do." Frank sighed deeply. In the last few days, he had made discreet inquiries about Richard Stone and his rehabilitation center. To his surprise, everything indicated that the veterinarian was respected and his work legitimate. 3 days, he finally conceded. "And if there's any sign of danger, it goes immediately." 2 hours later, a pickup truck with a special trailer parked in the farmyard. Richard got out, accompanied by 2 assistants. His face showed signs of a sleepless night. "Thank you for accepting," he said, shaking Frank's hand. "Duke is sedated now, but the effect will pass soon." "Duke?" asked Emily. "That's what they called him in the circus." Richard paused, his gaze darkening. "They used him in humiliating performances. He has scars all over his body." With extra care, the team transferred the huge animal to the stone corral. Even sedated and downcast, Duke's imposingness was evident. His black coat was dull, stained by old scars and recent wounds. One of his horns was partially broken. "My God," murmured Emily, observing through the bars. "What did they do to him?" Richard positioned himself beside her, his expression grave. "Years of abuse. He was the main attraction of the circus. They forced him to do tricks, used whips and electric prods." Emily felt a wave of nausea. The idea that human beings could inflict such suffering on an animal was almost unbearable. "Physically, he will recover," continued Richard. "But the psychological trauma is deep. He doesn't trust anyone, especially humans. At the center, we have a specific protocol for cases like this, but it will take time." "What can I do?" she asked without taking her eyes off the buffalo. "For now, just observe. When the sedative wears off, we'll see how he reacts to the new environment." In the following hours, Emily remained near the corral, keeping enough distance not to alarm the animal, but allowing him to get used to her presence. Richard watched, surprised by the young woman's patience. By the end of the afternoon, Duke began to show signs of alertness. The effect of the sedation had completely passed, and he was now exploring his new environment with growing agitation. His eyes, small and deep, reflected fear and distrust. "He's scared," said Emily. "He doesn't know where he is or what to expect." Frank, who was observing from a distance, approached cautiously. "How are we going to feed him?" he asked, practical. "As always. He won't let anyone get close in this state." As if to confirm his words, Duke charged against the corral bars when one of Richard's assistants approached with a bale of hay. The impact was so strong that the wooden beams shuddered. "Let's leave the food in the feeder and back away," suggested Richard. "He'll eat when he feels safe." But Emily had another idea. Moving away from the group, she went into the house and returned minutes later with an apple. "What do you intend to do?" asked Frank, alarmed. "Just establish contact." Before anyone could stop her, Emily approached the bars, maintaining a respectful distance. Duke immediately focused on her, his nostrils dilated, his body tense. "It's okay, big guy," she said in a low, melodious voice. "No one is going to hurt you here." Richard observed with professional interest, but also with a hint of concern. The buffalo was unpredictable, and even the most docile animals could become dangerous when traumatized. Emily didn't try to offer the apple directly. Instead, she placed it on the ground, close to the bars, and backed up a few steps. Then she sat on the grass, assuming a relaxed and non-threatening posture. Time seemed to stretch as Duke observed the apple and the young woman alternately. Finally, to everyone's surprise, the huge animal slowly approached, extended his muzzle, through the bars and sniffed the fruit. "Amazing," murmured Richard. "He's never done that before." Frank watched the scene with a mixture of pride and apprehension. His daughter had always had a special way with animals, but this was something beyond understanding. What none of them knew was that this moment, seemingly simple, would only be the beginning of a much more complex journey. Duke carried deeper secrets, traumas that went beyond physical abuse, and Emily, with her extraordinary gift, was about to discover truths that would change her understanding of the connection between humans and animals forever. In the days that followed, a singular routine was established on the farm. Emily spent hours near Duke's corral, sometimes just sitting in silence, other times speaking softly. The buffalo, initially distrustful, began to respond to her presence in a surprising way. He didn't approach completely, but his agitated behavior visibly diminished when she was nearby. Richard observed everything with professional fascination, taking notes and occasionally asking Emily questions about what she felt during these interactions. "It's as if there were a glass wall between us," she explained one morning as they walked through the pasture. "He wants to trust, but something prevents him. It's not just fear. It's something deeper." "Trauma," nodded Richard. "Animals that have suffered prolonged abuse develop complex defense mechanisms." Emily stopped, observing Duke from a distance. "It's not just that. There's something specific that terrifies him, something that happened." Richard looked at her with renewed curiosity. "How do you know?" She hesitated, unsure about how to explain her gift, even to someone who seemed to accept it. "I sense it. It's like he's trapped in a memory. When he approaches me, there are moments when his eyes change, as if he were seeing something else, another place." The veterinarian nodded slowly. "Emily, I'm going to tell you something I didn't mention before." He paused. Duke wasn't alone in that circus. There was another buffalo called Rex. They were kept together since they were calves. "And where is Rex now?" Richard's expression darkened. "He died 6 months ago. It was a performance that went wrong. Rex rebelled against the trainer and, well, they used brutal methods to contain him. He didn't survive the injuries." Emily put her hands to her mouth, horrified. "And Duke saw all this?" "Yes, he was forced to continue performing the same night." Richard's voice was laden with contained indignation. "That's why his case is so complex. He not only lost a companion, he was forced to ignore the suffering and continue as if nothing had happened." The pieces were beginning to fit together in Emily's mind. Duke's refusal to trust, his haunted look, the moments of sudden agitation without apparent cause. He wasn't just traumatized by the abuse. He was grieving. "I need to help him," she said with renewed conviction. "That's exactly why I came looking for you," replied Richard. "I believe your gift may be the key to cases like Duke's." That night, during dinner, the veterinarian formalized his invitation. "Frank, I'd like to take Emily to the rehabilitation center for a few weeks, with your consent, of course." Frank, who had observed his daughter's interaction with Duke with growing admiration, didn't seem surprised. And what exactly would she do there? She would learn structured animal rehabilitation techniques and, at the same time, help in cases like Duke's. Richard leaned over the table. Her natural gift combined with technical knowledge could work wonders. And after that? Frank's question was laden with paternal concern. "After that? Well, that will depend on Emily." Richard turned to her. "The center's doors are always open for talents like yours." The silence that followed was dense with possibilities. Emily looked at her father, aware of how difficult the decision was for him. Frank had raised his daughter alone since her mother's departure, protecting her as best he could from a world that didn't always understand special people like her. "How long?" Frank finally asked. "1 month initially," replied Richard. "Enough. Time for Emily to learn the basics, and for us to assess how her gift can be integrated into our work." Frank looked long at his daughter, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Is this what you want, Em?" The use of her abbreviated name, an intimacy that only her father allowed himself, touched her deeply. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft, but firm. "I need to better understand what I can do, Dad, who I am." Frank nodded slowly, his gaze revealing both pride and sadness. "1 month, then, but you call every day, and if you want to come back earlier, I'll come get her immediately." Completed Richard. The decision was made. The next morning Emily prepared a modest suitcase, including some photographs of the farm and a lock of Star's mane that she had kept since Moonlight's birth. The farewell was brief, charged with contained emotion, typical of Frank. "Take care." "Of yourself," he said, hugging her quickly before she got into Richard's car. "And who's going to take care of you?" she joked, trying to ease the tension. "Martha won't let me starve," he responded with a half-smile. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Duke. The buffalo seemed to sense that something was changing. When Emily approached the corral for the last time he came to the bars, something he rarely did, "I'll be back soon," she promised, extending her hand through the bars without touching him. "And when I return, I'll know how to help you better." As if understanding, Duke let out a long sigh, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting moment of pure connection. When the car left the property, Emily looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the solitary figure of her father gradually diminish. Her vision blurred, but she quickly wiped away the tears. This wasn't a definitive farewell, but the beginning of something new and important, a journey to discover the true extent of her gift, and perhaps the purpose for which she was born. With it, the trip to Pine Ridge lasted a little over 4 hours, but to Emily it seemed like a journey between worlds. As they climbed the mountains, leaving behind the familiar landscape of Greenfield, a mixture of anxiety and expectation grew within her. The imposing mountains and the increasingly rarefied air seemed like physical symbols of the transition she was experiencing. "Nervous?" asked Richard, noticing her prolonged silence. "A little," she admitted. "I've never been away from home for so long." "Understandable, but I think you'll be surprised by how much you can learn in a new environment." The Stone Animal Rehabilitation Center, as announced by a discreet sign at the entrance, was situated in an extensive and wooded property, away from the tourist center of the town. Emily immediately realized that the place had been planned with a clear purpose, to create a serene and protected environment, both for the animals and for the people who worked with them. "Welcome to your new temporary home," said Richard, parking in front of the main building of wood and stone, which blended perfectly with the mountainous landscape. In the following minutes, Emily was introduced to the team: veterinarians, handlers, animal behavior specialists, and some interns not much, older than she was. All received her with genuine curiosity, but without the skepticism she was accustomed to facing. "Richard told us about your gift," commented Lisa, the center's administrator, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes and a welcoming smile. "We're eager to see how we can work together." Emily felt strangely validated. For the first time, her gift wasn't seen as an eccentricity, but as a valuable ability. "I'll show you to your room, and then we'll take a tour of the facilities," offered Richard. The room was simple but comfortable, with a window that offered a spectacular view of the mountains. Emily unpacked quickly, placing the photograph of her father on the bedside table and the lock of Star's mane in a drawer, like a secret talisman. The tour of the center revealed an operation much larger than she had imagined. There were specific areas for different types of animals: horses, dogs, cats, and even a section dedicated to rescued wild animals. "Most of our patients come from situations of abuse or neglect," explained Richard as they walked. "Some were abandoned, others rescued from laboratories or illegal breeding operations. Each arrives with its own trauma story. Emily observed everything with attentive eyes, absorbing the details. The way the enclosures were designed to offer safety and appropriate stimuli, how the team interacted with the animals, always respecting their space and limits. And how do you decide which approach to use with each animal? She asked, genuinely interested in the methodology. Richard smiled, satisfied with the question. We start by observing, a lot. We try to understand the specific triggers of each animal, what causes fear, what brings comfort. Then we develop an individualized plan. He led her to an open circular space surrounded by a low fence. This is our interaction arena. This is where much of the reconnection work happens. Reconnection? Yes. Richard leaned on the fence, his gaze distant, as if visualizing past sessions. Traumatized animals often disconnect, not just from humans, but from their own nature. Our job is to help them reconnect, to rediscover who they are without the weight of trauma. The words resonated deeply with Emily. She had never thought of her gift in those terms, but it made sense. What she had always felt as a special communication with animals was perhaps a purer form of connection, free from the barriers that fear and trauma created. In the evening, after dinner with the entire team where they shared stories and experiences, Emily retired to her room, sitting by the window observing the distant lights of the town and the starry mountain sky. She picked up the phone to call her father. I arrived safely, she said when Frank answered. The place is amazing, Dad. I've never seen anything like it. Are you comfortable? The concern in his voice was palpable. Yes, very. Everyone is kind and... She hesitated. They understand. About my gift. They don't think it's strange. There was a brief silence. I'm happy for you, Em. Frank's voice sounded sincere despite the evident longing. And how is Duke? They haven't brought him yet. Richard wants me to adapt first, get to know their method. They talked for a few more minutes about the farm, about Star and Moonlight, about the small things of everyday life. When she hung up, Emily felt a wave of gratitude for her father. Despite all the differences, he had always supported her journey, even when he didn't fully understand it. In the following days, Emily was gradually introduced to the routine of the center. Every morning she participated in theoretical sessions on animal behavior and rehabilitation techniques. In the afternoon, she accompanied different team members in practical sessions, observing how they applied theoretical knowledge to real cases. What impressed her most, however, was realizing that her natural gift aligned with much of what was taught there. Patience, attentive observation, the ability to read subtle signs. All of this was part of both her innate ability and the formal techniques she was learning. 1 week after her arrival, Richard called her to his office. Lisa and I are impressed with your adaptation, he said, indicating a chair. You absorb knowledge quickly and have already established a good relationship with the team. Thank you. Emily smiled, genuinely happy with the recognition. I feel like I'm in the right place. Good, Richard leaned forward. Because Duke arrives tomorrow, and we want you to be an integral part of his rehabilitation process. Emily's heart accelerated. She would finally have the chance to help the traumatized buffalo in a more structured way, combining her natural gift with the knowledge she was acquiring. I'm ready, she stated, with a confidence that surprised even herself. What she didn't know was that Duke's case would be much more complex than she imagined, and that the next few days would reveal not only secrets about the animal's past, but also about the nature and limits of her own extraordinary gift. Tentar novamente continuar editar plotted translation strategy, preserving American narrative context. As I need to continue the translation of the story, keeping the American names and setting I've established, the next part of the story seems to describe Emily's experience at the rehabilitation center and her work with Duke the buffalo. I'll continue from where I left off. The original Portuguese text follows characters named Ana Clara, João, Rogério, Beto, the buffalo, Nero, another buffalo, Marcia, Louisa, etc., in locations like Petropolis and Campos do Jordão. I've already converted these to Emily Grace. Frank, Richard Stone, Duke the buffalo, Rex the other buffalo, Martha, Lisa, etc. in American settings like Greenfield and Pine Ridge. I need to continue with the same style, maintaining the emotional tone and themes of the original while using natural American English expressions. The day dawned grey in Pine Ridge, with a dense fog that enveloped the mountains like a ghostly mantle. Emily woke before her alarm, her body tense with anticipation. Today Duke would arrive, and with him the true test of her gift and newly acquired knowledge. After a quick breakfast, she joined the team responsible for the buffalo's arrival. Richard was different that morning, more serious and focused than usual. "We need to be especially careful," he explained during the preparatory meeting. "Animals like Duke, with a history of severe trauma, can regress during transport. He may arrive here in a very different state than he was at the farm." Emily nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest. She had established a fragile connection with Duke in the days they spent together. What if that bond had been lost? The special truck arrived shortly after noon. The driver and 2 veterinary assistants descended, their expressions revealing that the journey had not been easy. "He's very agitated," one of them informed, "refused food and water throughout the trip." Richard exchanged a significant look with Emily before approaching the rear compartment of the truck. Through the small ventilation openings, they could hear the restless sound of heavy hooves against the floor. "Let's take him directly to the special enclosure," Richard decided. "The fewer stimuli now, the better." The special enclosure was an area isolated from the rest of the center, specifically designed for large animals with severe behavioral problems. It was spacious, surrounded by a high barrier but contained few elements, just the essentials to ensure physical comfort without sensorially overwhelming the animal. The transfer from the truck to the enclosure was tense. Duke resisted the movement, emitting sounds of anguish that broke Emily's heart. When they finally managed to close him in the new space, the buffalo immediately ran to the furthest corner, his breathing accelerated, eyes wide in evident panic. "Leave us alone, Richard," asked the assistants and handlers, then turning to Emily, "Please stay." The two remained at a safe distance, observing the animal for long minutes. Duke was unrecognizable compared to his last days at the farm. All progress seemed to have been erased by the stress of the journey. "What do you feel?" Richard asked in a low voice. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating, trying to recover that silent connection she had established. Confusion, fear. She opened her eyes looking at Duke with intensity. "But there's something else, as if he were searching for something. Or someone." Richard nodded slowly. "There's something I didn't fully tell you about Duke and Rex." He paused, carefully, choosing his words. They weren't just companions at the circus. They were raised together from calves. They were practically brothers. Emily felt a chill. "On the day Rex died," continued Richard, his voice laden with contained emotion, "Duke didn't just witness it. He tried to intervene, tried to protect Rex, and he was brutally punished for it." The images those words evoked were too painful. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "So it's not just trauma and grief," she murmured. "It's guilt. He feels guilty for not being able to save Rex." "Exactly." Richard looked at her with admiration. "It took me weeks of observation to reach that conclusion. You saw it in an instant." Emily didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on Duke now, seeing him in a new light, understanding the true nature of his suffering. It wasn't just the physical abuse or the loss, it was the crushing weight of impotence of having failed to protect someone he loved. "Can I try something?" she asked, feeling an idea intuitively forming. Richard hesitated. "For only a second. I trust you, but maintain a safe distance." Emily moved forward slowly, stopping several meters from the fence that delimited the enclosure. Duke noticed her approach, his immense body tensing even more. "It wasn't your fault," she said in a loud, clear voice. "You did everything you could." The buffalo's eyes fixed on her, his nostrils dilated. "Rex knows that. He knows you tried." It was as if an electric current ran through the animal. Duke let out a deep sound, almost a moan, and slightly lowered his head. "You don't need to carry this guilt," continued Emily, her voice breaking with emotion. "It wasn't you who hurt him. It was them." Something extraordinary began to happen. Duke took a step forward, then another, gradually approaching. There was no aggressiveness in his movements, only a cautious curiosity, as if Emily's words had reached some deep part of his consciousness. Richard watched the scene with amazement. In years of working with traumatized animals, he had never witnessed such an instantaneous and profound connection. "You're free now," continued Emily. "And Rex is too. You're both free." When Duke reached the fence, he stopped less than a yard from Emily. His enormous brown eyes, previously filled with fury and fear, now seemed to contain something different, something like recognition. "Incredible," murmured Richard, keeping absolutely still so as not to break the moment. Emily extended her hand without trying to touch the animal, only offering her presence. Duke remained there, breathing more calmly now, as if something fundamental had begun to change within him. When they finally backed away, leaving the buffalo with fresh water and food, Richard was visibly moved. "What happened there wasn't just technique or intuition," he said. "It was something deeper." "I felt as if I were really talking to him," admitted Emily, "as if he could understand not just the tone of my voice, but the real meaning of the words." That night, alone in her room, Emily reflected on the transformative experience. Her gift wasn't just an unusual ability to communicate with animals. It was a form of connection that transcended conventional barriers, that reached the emotional core of the other being. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Lisa, the center's administrator. "Emily? Richard asked me to let you know. Duke is eating. For the first time since he was rescued, he accepted food without hesitation." A smile illuminated the young woman's face. It was just the first step of a long journey, but it meant that healing had begun, for Duke and somehow for her too. The following 3 weeks passed at an intense rhythm of learning and discoveries. The connection established with Duke strengthened each day, and the buffalo showed constant signs of recovery. He no longer recoiled when humans approached, accepted feeding regularly, and most significantly began to show curiosity about his surroundings, a clear sign that the crushing weight of his trauma was diminishing. For Emily, the days at the Eye Center transformed into a journey of self-discovery. Working not just with Duke, but with other traumatized animals, she learned to refine her gift, to understand its limits and possibilities. Under the guidance of Richard and the specialized team, she combined her innate ability with structured techniques, creating a unique approach that began to attract the attention of everyone at the center. "I've never seen anything like it," commented Lisa during an evaluation meeting. "Emily can establish connections that would normally take months in a matter of days." Richard agreed, his face revealing both admiration and a kind of veiled concern. "It's a rare gift, without a doubt." He looked directly at Emily. "But it also demands a lot from you, doesn't it?" The question caught her by surprise. In the last few days, she had been experiencing a fatigue different from anything she had felt before. It wasn't just physical, but a kind of emotional exhaustion, as if each deep connection with a traumatized animal absorbed a bit of her own vital energy. "It's as if I absorb some of their pain," she finally admitted, putting into words what she had been feeling. "Especially with Duke. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling the same fear he feels." Richard exchanged a significant look with Lisa. "That's why we need to talk about the future," he said, leaning forward. "About your future, Emily." The month agreed with her father was coming to an end. In a few days, she should return to the farm in Greenfield, to the familiar comfort of her previous routine. But something had changed deeply within her. The center wasn't just a place of work or learning, it had become a place of belonging, where her gift was not just accepted, but valued and needed. "We'd like you to consider staying with us permanently," proposed Richard, "as an official apprentice initially, but with prospects of becoming an integral part of the team as you advance in your studies." Emily's heart accelerated. It was everything she had desired since arriving there, a chance to fully develop her potential, to make a difference in the lives of beings that suffered. "And my formal studies?" she asked, thinking of the high school she attended in Greenfield. "There are excellent schools in Pine Ridge," replied Lisa, "and we could adapt your routine at the center to accommodate class schedules." The proposal was perfect, almost too perfect. There was just one shadow, a weight in her heart that she couldn't ignore. "I need to talk to my father," she finally said. That night, the telephone conversation with Frank was one of the most difficult of her life. How to explain that? In just 1 month, her vision of the future had completely transformed. How to make her father understand that, although she loved him deeply, her place was now elsewhere. "You're telling me you're not coming back?" Frank's voice sounded distant, laden with a sadness she had rarely heard before. "I'm asking to stay longer, Dad, to explore this opportunity." Emily closed her eyes, holding back tears. "What I do here is important. It makes a difference." There was a long silence. "And at the farm? What you did there wasn't important." The question hit her like a precise arrow. In her excitement with the new path that was opening, she had forgotten how much her gift was also needed at her father's farm, how much she had contributed to the well-being of the animals there. "Of course it was," she replied, her voice breaking. "But here I can learn to do more, to help animals that really need it, that wouldn't have another chance without someone like me." Another silence, this one even heavier. "You're so much like your mother," Frank finally said, his voice softening. She also had this fire inside her, this certainty about her path. Emily felt a shiver. Her father rarely spoke about her mother, who had left them when she was only 5 years old, departing to follow what she called her true vocation as a wildlife researcher in Alaska. "I'm not abandoning you, Dad," she said, desperately wanting him to understand the difference. I'm just following my path." "I know, Em." Frank's voice now contained a note of resignation. "Maybe I always knew this day would come, that you were too big for our small farm." His words moved her deeply. Beneath his exterior rigidity, Frank had always understood his daughter better than she imagined. "Come visit me," he asked, "and bring that buffalo when he's recovered. I want to see for myself what you've managed to do." The promise was sealed that night. Emily would stay at the center for an indefinite time, dividing her time between work with the animals and completing her studies. Frank would sell part of the cattle, hire another employee to compensate for his daughter's absence, and visit her regularly. It wasn't a perfect arrangement, but it was a compromise born of mutual love and respect. 2 weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the center. Duke would be transferred from the special enclosure to a more open area, a significant step in his rehabilitation. Emily, Richard, and the entire team watched as the doors opened, offering the buffalo a new freedom. For a moment, Duke hesitated at the entrance, as if assessing whether this new reality was trustworthy. Then slowly, with deliberate steps, he advanced into the open space. The afternoon sun bathed his dark coat, now brighter and healthier. There was a renewed dignity in his posture, a presence that spoke of healing and rebirth. Emily watched, with tears in her eyes, feeling a joy that transcended words. Richard approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning," he said, "both for Duke and for you." She nodded, understanding the depth of those words. Her gift wasn't just a special ability or an unusual talent. It was a calling, a responsibility, a life path that was only beginning to reveal itself. That night, sitting on the center's porch, observing the stars that dotted the Pine Ridge sky, Emily felt a deep peace. Her journey had only begun, with all the challenges and discoveries that were yet to come. But now she knew with unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she should be. And somewhere, in the distant enclosure, Duke also rested under the same stars, both free from the prisons of the past, ready to embrace the infinite possibilities of the future that opened before them.